Hey guys, this is Delta Y, and today I'm going to be doing an unboxing video of a very special piece of technology from the 1980s. So let's go ahead and get started here. Alright, it's pretty heavy. So, what we have here is the TI-99/4A home computer by Texas Instruments. The initial version of this computer came out in 1981, and the one I have here is actually a later beige model, which was released in 1983. So let's go ahead and open it up and see what you get inside. Okay, so right up front we have the computer itself, or the console as it was called at the time. Go ahead and take that out. It's not super heavy actually. It's, I don't know, not as heavy as I expected compared to some of the PCs I grew up on in the early 90s, mid 90s I guess. What else do we have in here? Oh, it looks like we've got some original manuals here. Read this first. Okay, definitely check that out. And we've got a little advertisement with a user reference guide. So that looks like it for the main section. Then in this secondary box, we have, I believe, is the RF modulator. This is to hook it up to your TV. At the time, of course, nobody had computers or computer monitors, and they were quite expensive. So most computers of the time would actually hook up to a TV, either via the antenna or via the composite video port, which you've probably seen on lots of older hardware, the yellow, white, and red cables. So I do not have that adapter yet, but I do have the RF modulator, so I can hook it up to the antenna. And I'm not quite sure how that's going to work with this connector, but we'll see what we can do, I guess. And then next we have the power supply, which it looks like has a standard 2-prong plug, so that's nice. It won't take up any extra spots on my extension cord. Got this very large brick here with the TI logo, and then here's the connector that will go to the actual computer itself. And it looks like, oh, this is a detachable cord? Yeah, maybe not. So I'm gonna go actually test this before I plug it in to make sure that it's putting out the right voltage, because you never know with stuff this old. Yeah, even though it seems to be in the original box and in pretty good condition, I just want to make sure before I power it on that I'm not going to fry anything. Okay, so now let's take a closer look at the computer itself. As you can see, it's this whole unit actually here is not just the keyboard, but the whole computer. And we've got a keyboard up here. It's pretty small, but looks like it's fairly similar to a modern layout. You've got your shift keys in the usual place. You've got a tiny enter key here. You've got your space bar. And yeah, we don't have, it looks like, any dedicated arrow keys or anything like that. So I'm guessing that's the function. The function key here is what you would use to access the arrows or any of the other keys. So we'll see that once I get it hooked up, I guess, or take a look at the manual. We've got a power switch here, simple on and off. And this one, it looks like, doesn't have the power LED. It just has a little strip of paint there, which I guess was to cut costs a little bit. Up here we have the cartridge port, which was pretty common on computers of this era. And a lot of games and a lot of software was actually sold on cartridges because disk drives were usually an add-on for computers of this era. And a lot of people that had these wouldn't have the disk drive, especially for this particular model, the TI-99. The disk drive required a really large and expensive expansion box, so I believe there were only about 10% as many of those sold as there were the console itself. So, yeah, and you actually can get a modern sort of hobbyist-made aftermarket part that can emulate the disk drive. So, I will see what that costs if I can get my hands on one of those to try and get some more connectivity. But you could also connect a tape drive to the port here, which looks like a typical controller port for a Genesis or an Atari, but it's actually not. It is the same connector, but not the same pins. So this is what you'd use to interface to your tape recorder, and it actually just uses normal audio tapes, which is pretty cool. And you know, it was a very slow method of storage and not that great, but it was cheap at the time. A lot cheaper than a disk drive, and of course hard drives nobody had in home computers in 1981. We got the power port here. This actually takes AC power, which is a little bit interesting, and on the inside there's another portion of the power supply which converts that down to DC for all the components that need it. Over here we have the connector for the RF modulator or the video output cable, as well as audio. On this side we do have a controller port. And again, this looks like the Genesis or Atari controller. It is not compatible with those. It's actually a different pinout, but you can build an adapter pretty easily that will convert this to use with Atari joysticks. So I will probably do that at some point too, because the joysticks that were actually made for this system were not very high quality, and the Atari joysticks are a lot better, and they're also pretty cheap to find even nowadays. And then on the opposite side, we have this expansion card here. This was used for a speech synthesizer module, as well as a lot of other add-ons. And today, you can get several hobbyist-made expansions again. One that I will probably try to get my hands on actually connects this to a Raspberry Pi, which can both emulate a hard drive as well as a modem, so you can actually get this old thing on the internet. And you can browse some websites on it, which is, I think, pretty funny, and yeah, it would be a pretty interesting way to view the web. So how does this stack up against some other computers? The Commodore 64 is actually the best-selling computer of all time, and was from a similar era and released around a similar price. And then I also have, for comparison, my laptop, which I have currently, the Microsoft Surface Book, which, again, inflation adjusted, is a pretty similar price. So you can see while the TI-99 has a more powerful CPU than the Commodore 64, it's really hampered by the lack of RAM. It only has 256 bytes of general-purpose RAM compared to the Commodore's 64K. Now, there was an expansion you could get if you had the peripheral expansion box, which would bump that up to 32 kilobytes. Again, still less than the Commodore 64, but a little bit more usable. However, again, not too many people had that expansion box compared to the number of people who bought the computer. As far as graphics, the TI-99 has a lower available resolution than the Commodore did, both for graphics mode and for text mode. There was a higher resolution text mode for the TI-99, but it's not usable from BASIC. and that was 40 by 24. While the sound looks similar, the C64's sound chip is much more capable. The TI-99 is limited to a single type of sound, which is a square wave, whereas the Commodore 64 could choose between several types of waves. It had envelope filters, it had modulation. Neither one shipped with internal storage. For expansion, again, you have pretty similar ports between the TI-99 and the Commodore. The biggest difference here is that the Commodore 64 would have a floppy drive that connected to one of the ports already on the machine, whereas the TI-99, again, you need that expensive expansion box to be able to add the floppy. The Commodore 64 also has an RGB video output, which could be used with a computer monitor sold by Commodore or other manufacturers, as well as the composite video for TV. The TI-99 only has the composite video, so you don't have that higher quality output for text modes especially. So let's take a look at the bottom here. You can see we've got the TI logo, and this is the 99/4A computer. The copyright date for the program and data contents, 1979, which was the release year of the 99/4. And then 1981, the release of this computer, the 99/4A, which was much more common, much more popular. So I'm going to actually open this up and see what the inside looks like. And it looks like it just uses a regular number 2 Phillips. Might be a number 1 Phillips. Okay, so this actually comes apart really easily. I thought there were going to be some screws under those rubber feet, but it looks like they're all right here and very easy to access. So go ahead and set these aside so I don't lose them. And let's see what else we've got here. So I think I'm going to have to take a few more screws out here to actually get to the top side of the board and see what it looks like. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so now I've gotten it out of the case. We can see there's 3 main boards here. Looks like we've got the power supply, this is the power connector, and we've got some really big capacitors on here. I don't know what those are for, why it would need such big capacitors since it doesn't have a CRT display or anything like that. Here's our power switch, so I'm going to set that aside. Whoop! Okay. Next we've got the keyboard module, which I'm going to be careful with because these caps come off really easily and make a big mess, but it seems to be some kind of mechanical switch. It's not the cherry switches that you see a lot these days. It doesn't look like the Alp switch either, so it's maybe some kind of custom thing. I'm not totally sure, but it's got a nice meaty click to it. Wasn't that spacebar? Oh man. And we got the alpha lock key here, which actually is a latching switch, so it actually clicks up and down. Kind of interesting. And it just looks like a ribbon cable coming out of it, and I don't see any obvious hardware on here other than the keys. So I'm thinking this is just the keyboard. And over here we have the main board. You can see better this cartridge port, which goes down into the system. And again, here's your cassette adapter, your video adapter, And this big old RF shield to keep it from producing lots of radio interference. We'll go ahead and take that off next so that we can see what's under it. Okay, so now we're down to the main board of the system, and it looks like somebody's actually done some repairs on it. You can see these jumper wires, or maybe some modifications, so that's kind of interesting. I hope that it still works. What else? We've got the cartridge port again. The piece that actually hooks up to the front panel is just a right angle adapter. This big chip here is the CPU. This is actually a custom chip that was designed by TI for this series of computers, the TMS-9900 series, which is where the TI-99 gets its name. And this is actually a 16-bit CPU, which makes this the first ever 16-bit home computer. But it's hooked up in a way to the memory where it's mostly only using 8 bits, so it's not quite as capable as a real 16-bit machine like the IBM PC, but it is kind of unusual. The CPU has a little bit more capability than the 8-bit machines that were common at the time, like the Commodore and the Atari machines. So I'm not sure what all these other chips are, but we can guess that these small chips are probably either ROM or RAM. I would suspect this one with the heatsink attached is the video processor. If I had to guess, this one may be for the peripherals. I don't know. I can look up Teardown later and kind of see what all these are, but one thing that's pretty interesting is you can see these are all pretty big chips. The pins are spaced far apart, and some of them are even put in sockets here, so you can actually replace them without even having to do any soldering. But one of the nice things about computers from this era is because they use these big chunky components, they're actually very repairable, and a lot of these chips either are still made or you can get a modern compatible equivalent. So I think we have a good chance of keeping this thing running. So I think that's going to be it for the teardown. Now I'm going to put it back together and see if we can get it hooked up to something. Alright, so I have tested the power adapter, made sure it was outputting the right voltage, and then I put together just a little adapter for the RF modulator to hook it up to the antenna input on my TV. I'll show that in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and switch it on. And there it is. Now you can see this is pretty low quality video output. I don't know how much of that is just because it's using RF and how much is because of this this little adapter that I built, which basically I just stripped the end of a coaxial cable because this thing had these screw terminals and not a coax. So I stripped the ends of the coaxial cable and I just basically screwed it down to a scrap piece of PCB. Could have used anything for that, piece of wood, but that was what I had around. So now let's take a look at the TI-99. So it'll boot right into BASIC, and from here we can try out some commands. And we can input a program now. That's a mistake. And let's run it. So you can see we can write some programs, and this BASIC is pretty similar to other versions of BASIC from what I've seen. I took a bit of time to look through the manual and just figure out what I'm doing. So this is about all I can do right now. As you can see from the teardown, there's no actual storage inside the computer, so I need to get either a cassette adapter or some other kind of storage so that I can actually save programs. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time writing programs that are just going to get erased when I turn it off. And then I also I'm going to see if I can get a hold of some cartridges to run, because a lot of the cool stuff you can do here you can't actually do from BASIC. So you need a cartridge to run an assembler, or there's an extended BASIC cartridge, but yeah, the version of BASIC that comes on this computer doesn't have the peek and poke commands that a lot of other early BASICs had that would let you interact with the hardware directly. So it is kind of limited. Anyway, I think that's it for this video. So hopefully there will be more coming soon once I get some more stuff and figure out what I can make this thing do.